The movement deck archetype is one of the most interesting concepts I've seen in a card game. It relies on constant jumping between locations, surprising your opponent with big power spikes, and generally being unpredictable. I would say that movement decks as a whole represent the uniqueness of Marvel Snap. They really take advantage of the location mechanic, which separates Snap from the more traditional card games. With all that said, you'd expect that movement decks would be pretty popular as players also gain access to movement type cards pretty early on in Pool 1. That, however, is not true. The more you play the game and increase your collection level, the less likely you are to encounter movement decks. Don't get me wrong, it's not like they are bad or unreliable, it's just that for some reason people refuse to play this archetype. So why are movement decks so unpopular to play despite being very fun and not all underpowered? I'll break down my thoughts on this in a few sections. Let's begin with the last turn problem. Marvel Snap is a game of very few turns, 6 to be precise, unless magic is played, which makes the game last 7 turns. In general, it seems like the last 2 turns, and especially turn 6, is the most crucial point of a match in Marvel Snap. All of the big power spikes, snaps, counters, and generally game-winning moves are done at the end of the game. And most decks take full advantage of the last turn. Movement decks have only one option to play on turn 6, and 99.999% of the time, a movement deck will do the following. Just play Heimdall somewhere. That's it, just play Heimdall. What will happen after that? Nobody actually knows. Well, all jokes aside, it is true that most people have no idea if they will win the game after playing Heimdall or not. They just hope that when the movement happens, they will win the match, and that's it. While on the surface, Heimdall may sound like a rather straightforward card, you really need to start planning and playing around him from the start of the game. Everything on your side of the board will move to the left. So if you've been playing your combo movement cards on the left location from the start and keeping them there, well, there won't be any combo because they can't move anywhere. Also, you have to be very considerate of location space and filling your locations in general. Having only 4 spaces on each location means that you have to actually be super careful what and where you play, because when Heimdall comes on the board, there may not be space for each card to move. Which brings us to the core of the problem with the card. People don't really know what's going to happen when they play Heimdall, and they don't really know if they will win or not. Memorizing the way priority works and the way cards move in each location that has limited space is tough, and generally, people like to play Marvel Snap for the quick and fast games, not for the super difficult 200 IQ calculations. Overall, turn 6 can be very frustrating or uncertain, and the deck as a whole feels like playing the same way every single match because no matter what happens, Heimdall is always the only play on turn 6. With other decks that also have clear turn 6 plays, at least you know what you've been building up to the whole game. But here, oftentimes you wonder if things will actually work out, or you will get a surprising loss. The next problem with movement decks is one of the core cards that is supposed to give the deck a huge power boost. I'm talking about the infamous Human Torch. He is supposed to be one of the ultimate cards for the deck, yet somehow doesn't make the cut in many movement-based deck lists. Human Torch is a 1/2 card that doubles its power wherever he moves. The card fantasy is great, and the fact that it costs 1 and you can start setting up combos with him from turn 1 is amazing. Yet, the fact that it costs 1 energy is also its biggest downfall in my opinion. While Killmonger exists, Human Torch will always be an unreliable win condition. His power may get ridiculous. His unpredictable movement may confuse your opponent, but that doesn't really matter at the end of the day, if they just destroy him with Killmonger. The biggest counter to that, of course, would be armor, but armor simply does not work with a card that is supposed to move from location to location. For me, changing Human Torch to being immune to destruction would make such a huge difference, but I'm not sure if that won't turn out to be just a bit too overpowered. There is another card that needs to be talked about when analyzing the movement deck archetype: Multiple Man. Multiple Man basically leaves a copy behind whenever he moves to another location. This sounds incredible for the movement decks, but in reality, it is not that great and can actually be detrimental to your game-winning plan. Multiple Man costs 2 energy, but that is only in theory. To take full advantage of its effects, you need to somehow buff the card or risk clogging your location with 3 power cards. You can play Multiple Man on turn 2, but you need something like Hulkbuster on turn 3, and then on turn 4 you can actually start doing the big movement combos. Frankly, that sounds like too much setup required over a power spike that may not even be that big. And as I said earlier, Multiple man has a big risk attached to it, with its filling your locations and leaving you with no real room to maneuver. Now, don't get me wrong, I know that once in a while you can get a super powerful combo with multiple man and just destroy your opponent, but I would say that these games are the exception rather than the rule. Another critical point to consider when talking about movement decks is its ability to move cards itself. I feel as a whole the deck archetype somewhat lacks in terms of controlled movement options, especially cheap ones. Iron Fist is great, and I feel like 1 energy movement combos could be a great benefit for this type of deck. Heimdall costs 6. Doctor Strange is too restrictive, and Cloak is great, but overall it feels like the movement portion of the concept could surely use a few more cards. Last but not least, we have to mention the overall lack of options when building a movement deck. It's always the same old cards most of the time, with Heimdall as the finisher, and there just isn't much variation. Let's take destroy decks for example. There are numerous ways to build those. You could go with full Deadpool synergy, where you try to buff his power to incredible levels. You could go with She-Hulk and Wave. You could go with Nimrod, or even add Null to your deck, or maybe Thanos. So many options. That cannot be said for movement decks, where variety differs a lot. This can be solved in 2 ways. With brand new movement cards, or with player innovation. Maybe people have just not come up with good movement decks yet, or there aren't enough players experimenting. As a whole, movement decks are one of the most fun concepts in Marvel Snap, but the few problems with this archetype are hindering them from being truly meta-defining. I believe, however, that with some fine-tuning and by adding some extra movement cards to the game, this will be solved. Don't forget to like and subscribe, or your next variant may turn out to be Pixel Vulture. See you next time. Oh, and check out this match.